Ray Burke. I'm a professor of marketing in the Kelley School of Business.
Yeah, I'm Tom Lenz. I'm chairman of the Undergraduate program, and I was one of the members of the task force that led the redesign process. And today, Ray, I know we want to talk about the process and sort of how it unfolded. And maybe I could sort of get us going with where it started, and then we worked together for 2 years.
Sure.
It's one of the things we'll say as we talk a little bit about this, the length of the process. But it's interesting the way the process began. I know in the spring of 2009, Dan Smith asked me to stop by and indicated he had some interest in having the I-Core sort of re-examined. And at that time, I learned when I talked with him that he had been talking with some students and gained some impressions of the I-Core about what it was, how it was performing, what the students were learning, and so forth. And as it turns out, he had 3 concerns. One is that he felt that the caliber of the student had increased dramatically in the business school, and of course that had happened over the years, and that the I-Core had really been designed for an earlier generation of students, and that those students weren't quite as equipped in terms of the high school preparation they had. We had very, very good direct admit students, and also their technical capabilities were really superior and different from what we'd had in previous generations.
Sure.
So he was concerned about that. He also was at a time when we were beginning to develop global partnerships around the world, most recently in India, but I know we're expanding that. And so he wanted to make sure that the I-Core accommodated international and global perspective. And then he was very much aware that the technologies of instruction were changing pretty dramatically because we'd had a great success with Kelley Direct, and he knew some of that would ultimately spill over and be accommodated in the undergraduate program. So when I first talked with him about that, the focus was on the I-Core almost exclusively. Those were his primary concerns. But you know that as we worked together, we had scope creep, as they call it, and the work of the task force ended up embracing the entire undergraduate curriculum. And so that was the earliest, I say the impetus for our work started then. And then, of course, we went on to form the task force. So I don't know if you'd like to chat about that a bit.
Yeah, so it was a great opportunity to get involved in what would be a very important innovation for the Kelley School, looking at the entire undergraduate program. I think one of the reasons why we had the scope creep that you described was because as we looked at I-Core, which really was a signature experience for the Kelley students, it's something that they all talked about, and as we thought about how we might innovate in that program, there was just too much that we wanted to do to squeeze into the junior year of the program. And so we had to go back and look at the first and the second year and make sure that the students had the preparation that they needed to be able to challenge them in the way that we wanted to in I-Core. And we identified a whole set of different issues that we wanted to work on, including technology. You mentioned the global component. Certainly we wanted the program to be perceived as being very innovative, and one of the areas that we really concentrated on was this global opportunity. And the members of the task force, so in addition to our participation, we had Scott Smart involved, we had Frank Aceto, Ash Soni participated in the task force, Tatiana Kolovu, and Gail Fairfield, and Tim Baldwin. So we had representation from some great faculty at the school and administrators, and we were able to jump in to this. Now, with regard to the global dimension, there was a subgroup of the faculty who had worked on that, and then presented some ideas and recommendations to the larger group.
You know, that too was one of the dilemmas I still think about a lot when I reflect on what we did is because we started as we did and populated the task force as we did initially, we really didn't know we were going to engage the whole curriculum. So we didn't recruit what I would call a representative body.
Yes.
And when I think about doing that, one of the concerns I had about doing that, frankly, even when it was recommended, oh, you should expand the group and, you know, we have to have members from the following 5 departments or 3 departments that were left out, is I think it would have, my personal opinion, it would have been detrimental to have a group of people in the room that see themselves representing constituencies whose interests are to be protected in any discussions, I think we would have ended up with a very different program. It's territorial. I think it's natural because of the way our financial system and credits for teaching and so forth are set up, is that if it appears that the courses are being changed in a way that reallocates money, time, sections, faculty, and so forth, it has many, many reverberations sort of through the school. And that was certainly one thing that as I go back, if someone said in retrospect, okay, we're going to redesign the curriculum of our school, what would you recommend in terms of the composition of the task force? I guess I felt that the hazards of a representative body were greater than the frustrations and concerns of having a smaller group that was incredibly flexible and willing to consider options. But that too is, I think, one of the real tensions in forming a group. Let me comment a little bit about process, because I know I was at a conference about 3 weeks ago that the AACSB sponsored, and it had to do with innovations in undergraduate education. So I attended. I didn't present there, but I attended, and it was interesting to listen to representatives of different universities talk about the processes they used to change their curriculum. And if the one that comes to mind was Boston University, and it was interesting to see how they changed their curriculum. They had a very logical, clear group. A task force was identified, and then once that task force had some ideas, those were fed out into standing committees that were already in the schools, and that was then turned over to the representatives in those secondary committees to actually do the refinements in the curriculum. And so it was sort of a tiered process. And when I compared it to what we did, as you'll recall, we didn't start out with a conversation about what should this process look like over a year or two. We started out, I must say that the group we had was just remarkably creative individuals that were very, very committed to undergraduate education. And Gail Fairfield, who's a member of our professional staff, of course, was on that committee. And one of the reasons that Gail was on it, and I found out is an absolutely critical role when I listened to other universities present, is that despite the fact that most of the faculty have taught in the undergraduate program for many years, the knowledge of the program and how it works, sequencing requirements and so forth, is very, very complicated and very, very detailed. So when we had Gail join us, she brought light to that process. And where we had some just excellent ideas, I think, about what was possible, she would throw up her hand and says, wait, you can't do that because. And at the same time, she would open the door to other opportunities. So Gail brought a lot of discipline in that process. But, when we started with this group, since we didn't start out by saying, here's sort of the architecture of the process, I thought it was interesting in retrospect how it unfolded. Because we had the core, what I'd call the I-Core Task Force group, that was the heart of it. And when we began to work, one of the things we found out is there was such a volume of issues to be concerned about, and they were so differentiated one from the other, that I know, first broke into subcommittees, and some of the subcommittees began doing work. I know several of the subcommittee members got together and prepared what I would call the sort of the paradigm of all overseas study programs that was compared. There was a group we called the Panera Group because that's where they met, I think, at Panera to begin looking at how business works and the Global Foundation's core. A lot of that was done sort of offline and then brought back to the committee as a whole. And then there were also a set of other task forces and groups working on a variety of projects that were not related to those two issues. They were really broader. And so when I look back at the process, Ray, I guess I think of it more as like almost a hub and spokes. The I-Core Task Force was the hub, and everything came back through them ultimately. But I thought one of the most important things we did is we did not force every issue through that small group.
Yes.
Because we found that, we, as knowledgeable as we were, we had limits to our knowledge of these areas. We needed the skills of other people. And so at any one time, we would have the task force running, probably at least 2 subcommittees of the task force running, and 4 or 5 other groups working simultaneously on a variety of other issues that either worked with me or you or one of the other members. So I thought when I compared it to what happened, what they did at Boston University, our process really had a completely different design. And I think the strength of that is it let us go faster. Is we could process more quicker and get resolution and move to it. So when I sort of reflect on that process, if I had that to do all over again, even though it looks messy if you try to draw it, or show it to someone, I thought it had some real strengths.
Yes.
And some real strengths.
Well, it definitely was able to bring in perspectives really from around the school. And in addition to the subcommittees that you mentioned, we brought in people from instructors of the existing undergraduate courses. We brought in administrators, people from the dean's office and the different programs to get their best thinking. We looked outside at best practices at other universities, and it was an intensive process. But I think that we had the goal of building the best program that we could, and I think we have some great ideas.
To your point about what we did initially, I know a lot of times if you look at books on curriculum design, the first thing the task force would have done is to look at the curriculum, begin looking at courses. And I think it benefited us not to do that.
Yes.
I can recall us sharing information and sort of some of the findings of books that had been written about undergraduate education. There was a terrific study that the AACSB did on the globalization of management education, and really sort of took to task some business schools for calling global education just sending students over to the arts college and saying, take a foreign language, go on a trip and come back and you have a global point of view. And as we'll talk about in a moment, that was not our idea, and we ended up not doing that. In fact, we took that part of our undergraduate program out. There were some books written about academically adrift that were essentially indictments of college education. The students weren't learning. There was a very good book that came out called Rethinking Undergraduate Business Education that one of our former presidents, Tom Ehrlich, was a co-author of that book. But there were a number of things, Grown Up Digital, where we really tried to get a look at it. And I think that was another advantage of our program, because when we proceeded, one of the first things we could have done is gone straight to the curriculum or gone straight to the faculty and say, what would you like to teach? And neither one of those approaches has students in it. And so I thought that was one of our learnings, at least it was for me, that curriculum design that I'd been involved in for 3 decades around the Kelley School was often just suggesting subject matter, embedding it, somewhere in the curriculum and saying it now that is a requirement. But I think by looking at the nature of students and looking broadly at the issues facing higher education really let us approach curriculum design from a little bit different vantage point, and I think that ended up being beneficial to us.
Yeah. And so when we went through this process, some of the things that we discovered, we had students who were graduating from the program who had great international experiences. They had done study abroad. They were incorporating this into their coursework. But then at the same time, we had other students that had no exposure to this international perspective, and so because there was such a diversity of background, we couldn't really build on that in the other coursework that we had in the program. So as we looked at I-Core and making that more of a global perspective and bringing international cases into that, we just didn't have the student preparation for that. And I think at the time we had maybe approaching 55 to 60% of the students who had some study abroad experience. And we wanted to look for a mechanism for more students to get involved and to make it more accessible, and to address some of the concerns that students had were with the cost of international travel and with the time that was required. There were a number of barriers that surfaced that we had to address. Students, in some cases, could not travel internationally because they had other commitments during the summer, because of visa restrictions, and so we had to be very flexible in the design to accommodate these issues. I think another opportunity that we had identified is that we have tremendous diversity among our students. Students come from all different backgrounds, but not everyone valued that diversity, and that wasn't really being leveraged in the classes that we were teaching. And so by bringing in this global dimension, we were able to make students more sensitive to the importance of understanding different cultures and different economic and political environments. And that was really a jumping off point to a fresh look at what we could do in the undergraduate program.
Let me just mention one thing to kind of jump in there. Yeah. I think one of the things you mentioned that I don't know that it's necessarily done at all schools is the weight we gave to students' opinions about their education. Mm-hmm. I can remember our group was chartered, of course, it was November the 9th of 2009. And we completed our work on December the 9th. The 2009 was when or 2011, that's when the actual vote took place. Mm-hmm. So it was 2 years and a month. And one of the things I thought we did is, in terms of process, is as we were sort of moving forward as a task force, we would sort of pause and I guess I would say engage different constituencies and then come back and engage and come back. And one of the constituencies we engaged was Kelly Student Government. Mm-hmm. Because in December of 2009, Kelly Student Government's 4 officers on the undergraduate committee accepted a challenge that we put down to them. We said, essentially, we want you to tell us what is your assessment of the undergraduate program and what are your recommendations, and we need that in about 60 days. Mm-hmm. And so over the holiday break during December of 9 and then coming into a little bit into January of 10, that group got together. It was led by Lauren Sisgray, who then was the president of Kelly Student Government, and she assembled and contacted a group of about 50 of our finest students. She knew them. She was among them. And they put together a report, and I'll never recall or never forget when it was given to us in the springtime. It was either late January, early February, that it really had some stunning ideas in it, I thought. They were quick to point out that they felt that they weren't adequately prepared for their making a decision about their career. Mm-hmm. Now this came at a school where we had an exceptional undergraduate career services office, and we had 2 courses that were devoted to that, X220 and X420. Both of those courses had been well taught, but I think the faculty would say they've always been challenging courses. One was sophomore level and one was junior. And so that was one thing they said, and when we talked more about it with them, I know what they were really getting at is they said, you know, it's not that we don't know salaries and who's coming to campus and so forth, is that we can't prepare ourselves by listening to other people talk. Mm-hmm. And so the courses that we had essentially would have faculty as a chair of marketing. You may have gone in at one time and said, here's our majors, here's the courses, and that was to acquaint them with what their options were. And then we would have corporate executives and managers come in and say, here's how my career unfolded, here are some options. And as long as they were on just the receiving end of that information but weren't able to engage it in a conversation and really pursue it to any greater level of depth, mm-hmm. what they were saying to us is that's why we feel unprepared. Even I think some of them that were seniors and say, well, I've accepted a position, I'm still not sure I made the right choice or reflected on it properly. So out of that student engagement, one of the things that came out of that was Compass. That's one mm-hmm. of the ideas, is we have to address that need. Another thing that you mentioned a moment ago with the term signature event, which became our signature experience, that became part of the vocabulary of the I-Corps task force, because they told us that in the freshman year, students are very excited coming to Indiana University. Everything's fresh and new. That's an exciting year. Then sophomore year, a lull. You're taking a bunch of prereq courses, nothing special, nothing memorable. Junior year, a high point, I-Corps. So they consider that the heart of business education. And then, interestingly, in their majors, there was sort of a tailing off. And as we talked about that, I don't know who said it on the task force, but we asked ourselves the question, why shouldn't every year have a signature experience? Why shouldn't every year be special? And as I look back on that, I think that was really a breakthrough for the committee to even ask ourselves that question, because the I-Corps had been the heart of our brand since 1970. Sure. And so to sort of put before us the challenge of saying, well, in the sophomore year, what should be that signature experience in the freshman year and in the senior year? And so I think by having the students involved, along with faculty, professional staff, the Dean's Council was involved at some point, I thought they really contributed a lot to what we ended up doing.
Yeah. And I think that in part they were reflecting the changing needs of students over the years, because it used to be that the School of Business really was a 2-year program. It was for juniors and seniors, and so students in their first 2 years were focusing on general education requirements. But more and more our students are directly admitted into the program. They're enthusiastic about business. They want to get started right away, and so their expectation is that they're going to be engaged in business courses from the first semester.
Right. Right. And that was a need we really hadn't met. I think most faculty had that sort of a view, well, until you have the foundations and tools, you're really not prepared to think about business. And with these kids coming out of high schools with great academic credentials, AP credits, just amazing amount, then looking for an experience in that freshman year that would be something that would really grab them and address the need. That, of course, gave birth to How Business Works, and I know you had some experiences near to that with high schools, visiting and telling them about the work you did for when your student was in high school, you're a child. But that notion of how business works and grabbing those students immediately and really showing them the major operations of business and how decisions are made, I think is one of the most important changes in the curriculum. And you're closer to that than anyone because you were the architect of that.
Yeah. Well, it is an exciting course, and so you have students coming in, and because they're majoring in business, they'd like to get started right away with their coursework. But many of these students don't have a good understanding of the different functional areas of business. They come in and they may have had the calculus class and the AP chemistry and physics and so forth, but limited exposure to business. And so in designing that course, we had to think of a way to make these functional areas accessible to the students, to provide an integrated framework so that they could see how the different parts work together. And so, how you price a product is going to impact the financial performance of the firm. It's going to be involved in the marketing decision making. It's going to have cost and operational implications, and strategic issues. And so the students needed to see how all of those elements fit together. And the course had to be engaging. I think we've all had introduction to a topic kinds of courses, and it's very hard to design a course that is pitched at the right level. You're either creating something that's very challenging and you're leaving some of the students behind, or you're trying to create something that is so basic and introductory that the best students aren't engaged. And I think we were successful in the design of the How Business Works course by using a hybrid model where students get a lot of that background information online, and so if students need more exposure to that, they can spend longer on these with these online materials, and then use the class time to have an interactive discussion, to do exercises in the class, and really extend the material that the students have been covering. Another innovation that was associated with that course was to team teach the course. I think that everyone really enjoys that kind of a pedagogy when you can do it, but to offer that at such a scale to accommodate this number of students is really challenging. But we've done that, and so we're able to take these case studies that are MBA level Harvard Business School case studies and present these to freshman students. And to teach these across multiple class sessions with the instructors taking different perspectives. One day it's marketing, one day it's production or finance or management. And students really do start to see how these pieces fit together. Not only providing an engaging first experience, but a platform for the other work that they're going to do in their courses in the sophomore and the junior year.
Yeah. I think the How Business Works, of course, originally the task force recommended that for all students coming in. That was our original thought. And there were some reservations in certain quarters, and I think some of the faculty felt that this caliber of student were coming in, some of them are sophisticated enough that they actually understand a business enterprise, essentially.
Yes.
They know what they want to do, and they did not want that course to be an impediment in the sense that it took 3 credit hours of their time and they could have been used elsewhere. I know the responses that we've had from the first teaching, as you know well, of the How Business Works, seems to me that over time, even though it's only available as an elective for direct admits, I really look for that to become a requirement coming into the undergraduate program at some point, because it meets a tremendous need of the students, and it is such a preparation for the rest of the courses that they will take, whether it's business law or accounting or whatever it may be, that it provides, it really moves them quickly toward thinking like a business person, which, as you said before, was delayed until the junior year in I-Corps. Right. That's been it. So I think that is really going to become an even more important course as we go forward. And the novelty with which it's taught, I've viewed some of the videos and trying to get across to a freshman, a high school student, that how functions are interdependent, and if you change one, you're really changing the other. And that doesn't necessarily occur to them, because a lot of students think of business education as either finance or accounting. That's it.
Right.
And so when they see the importance of the other functions and then areas of law and economics and so forth, they just, I think, are really taken by, oh, this is much bigger than I thought it was.
Yeah.
But one of the things I'm going to be intrigued about is, since we're implementing a year at a time, is when the students that elected to take How Business Works end up in I-Corps. And they will come in fully equipped with understanding functional interdependence in business. They'll have considerable knowledge of the global business environment. And so the I-Corps faculty, I think one of the challenges to them is, what do we do with I-Corps?
Yes.
It's always been functional integration around marketing, finance, operations, and strategy. And as you know, we pulled strategy out of that mix and put in a new leadership and team-based course. But I think one of the challenges they're going to face is, how do we deal with students that have a pretty good idea of interdependencies in business decision making, and then what do we do about the global nature of it? Because the course has been largely domestically focused.
Yes, yeah. Well, I think that you'll have students coming in prepared to ask the right questions. They're going to be thinking about what's the market potential. They're going to be thinking about what's the production process and who are the key partners, and how do I raise the money to launch this business. And I think that I-Corps now can spend more time on helping students to understand how to make those decisions and provide them with that strong functional foundation. Because once students move past I-Corps, they start to focus in the major areas, and that may be the last exposure that they have to some of these topics. And so it's going to free the I-Corps instructors to do even more in terms of getting depth in those functional areas.
I look for that to address some of former Dean Dan Smith's concerns about how challenging I-Corps was.
Yes.
He really wasn't critical of the faculty and suggesting what should be taught and what should not be taught, but he did feel that we really needed to elevate the overall challenges as the students went through the program. And I think this is going to meet one of those early goals, because those were one of the 3 goals that he had really put before us, and was challenging us to meet those. Also, it was interesting to me, Ray, how the program came together. How did we end up with a prototype that we could take to the faculty? Because as we talked, we started out very broadly with looking at external influences on undergraduate education. We did not look at courses and subject matter and sequencing requirements. And then we began saying, from a more intellectual or subject matter point of view, what needs to be in the program? And of course, we've described some of that. But someone once asked me, well, when did it all come together? And I'd be interested in your response. My response is that the prototype that we finally had confidence in, that we took to the faculty and others, was sort of coalesced. And I can remember a meeting in which we had done a lot of reading, a lot of thinking, and I forgot who it was said, what are our must-haves? What must this program have? And I think it may have been Tim Baldwin. And we sort of put on a list on the blackboard in room 3022 of the whiteboard. Sort of I said, okay, these are the absolute must-haves of that program. And I think in doing so, we sort of defined, these are the limits of the prototype. This is what has to be in it. And that's what I meant by coalescing. I don't know how you felt about it coming together.
Well, we absolutely had to be mindful of constraints. We couldn't just go wild with new courses that were being added to the curriculum, because the university has a total number of credits, and we don't want to take away degrees of freedom from students who want to be able to customize their education based on their individual interests and career plans. And so we really had to focus on what was most important if we were going to be adding any courses to the requirements, to the curriculum. I know that one of the aha moments for me as we worked on the different aspects of this was when we looked at the global exposure that the students had, and we were seeing lots of great work. Faculty who were creating programs to take their students to London and to Latin America and to India, to Asia, and so forth. Lots of great work, but there was really no coherent vision that could serve as a foundation for the rest of their undergraduate education. And so when we said, we really need early in the program, in the sophomore year, to provide a common perspective for these students, so everyone had the same platform and that they could build on, and that would give students the opportunity to do travel abroad and to free up time to do internships later and so forth. I mean, that was a real eye-opening experience, because I think that as different universities and different business schools look at what they're doing, they might feel good about the program because, well, yeah, we're traveling to all these places and we've got, students are taking trips and so on. But really, how well are you providing students with this coherent framework to think about international issues?
Yeah, that's one thing I really am proud of in the new curriculum. I think it has I guess I would call it a deliberateness and coherence that you're saying, that is so easy now to communicate to parents. When they come in, came in before, we didn't have the idea of the signature experience, what's memorable each year, where's that thing you go home and, in a break between semesters and talk about with parents or other students. And I think that is really, really part of it. And, as we were beginning to share this with faculty, there's something I certainly took away from it, is we had 2 rounds of visits with most departments. I think you and I were with finance over in the Union Building at one of the meetings. And Gail and I had met with finance previously, and then as we could, we sort of paired up and visited with each department and shared ideas. And one of the things that I learned from that, I don't know if you may feel the same way, is I found that early on, when we took before the departments ideas that were not yet formed into a prototype, it was incredibly difficult for faculty to entertain that idea, because they wanted to know, well, where does it fit? How many credit hours? Who's going to teach this? How does it influence the rest of the program? And, our committee was so used to discussing in the abstract a whole array of possibilities, not being wed to any, and not being fearful if we were to lose one and something else was to take its place. It was just a marvelous group of people to work with. But if I had to do it over again, I'd be very careful about taking ideas that were not fully formed and integrated and all tied up in a nice bow, because I felt that when the faculty engaged that, it was sort of frustrating for them because they couldn't see the whole.
Right.
But when we got to the whole, and we could see everything, I think it was much easier for the faculty to say, oh, I see what you're doing, and I see what Compass is, and I see why we're changing that. But that was something that I really learned if I had to do it again.
Yeah, I think for lots of people, the costs are more salient than the potential benefits.
Yes.
Because you immediately recognize that you're going to have to do some additional course development, that you may lose some majors if students are exposed to other material early in the program. There are concerns that maybe these new courses won't be as rigorous as some of the current courses that you have. So those costs loom large early in the process, whereas the benefits, until you actually deliver the program, it's hard for people to really fully see what the student gain is going to be and how it's going to positively impact the departments. I think the other issue that we ran into is that when we presented to the departments, we presented just a whole range of different ideas, and so people could pick pieces of it and say, well, I don't like that piece, or I don't like that piece, and not say, well, let's pull out the things that we're really excited about and let's develop those and build those. And I agree that making sure that you have a well-reasoned plan and have thought through the executional details is important. But at the same time, the process did take a long time, and people were anxious, if you didn't have communications, and they felt like their opinions weren't being incorporated, and so you had to get out there and share ideas, even if they were tentative.
Yeah, that was one of the real dilemmas, I think, is I'm not sure in retrospect how I feel about it, but the tension between keeping people informed and involved. But as you involve them, you're being involved in a process that's not nearly completed yet, a prototype, and getting their reactions. Because I think among faculty, there is a latent need for rationality. And I don't think any of them say this, but when you listen to them talk and you have a conversation with them about different options and abstractions, and we could do this or we could pair this with that, it's the norm they want to apply is, look, work this out so that I can see it, because we had a curriculum that was very rational, very well laid out, and very well understood. And anytime we talked about a variety of options, the reaction that you mentioned was what we experienced. And sometimes I wonder, Ray, if it didn't generate frustration. And they're saying, oh, wow, this thing has gone off the tracks, and individuals would pull something out of a discussion and it would end up in the hallways, did you hear they're going to do this? So going back, I'd have to get an awful lot of thought to a communication strategy that would be what I thought was more open than the one we have, and at the same time didn't introduce such disturbance that the disturbances themselves ended up being problematic.
Yeah, I think it's also important to recognize how the work of the task force evolved over time. Initially, we really were focused on I-Corps, and so we had representation from the different departments that were teaching in I-Corps. But then, as the work of the task force expanded, now we were touching on other departments and who felt in some cases left out of the loop, and so we had to make a special effort to pull them in.
And the fact that our school too did not go through the conventional channels to redevelop the program. We didn't start, for example, with departments, then go to the Undergraduate Policy Committee, and then the Academic Council. We sort of ran parallel to a lot of other activities in the school, and then introduced that into the decision-making process, and of course we had our final approval. But I've always thought, as I look back and sort of had to, if someone asked me to parse the process out, I think the first part had to do with sort of a searching reflection point of view. There was a sort of a middle point of a coalescence of a prototype, and then something we haven't talked about much, but it might be interesting, is the negotiated outcome. Even though a prototype, I think we put together, was a pretty handsome product, it encountered the reality of the political and social structure of the school. And there had to be accommodations. And as you'll recall, even in the 11th hour, there were some accommodations made. So the program was a negotiated outcome as much as it was anything else.
But I think that we focused on what was most important to include. And the current program reflects that, and the fine tuning that needed to be done in order to address those concerns. I think that with the program implemented, you can see which of those were really important concerns to address, and which of them really were not major issues and didn't require long-term changes to address.
With regard to the formal improvement, because we sort of talked about the behind the scenes, how the process unfolded, but the formal process of approval in the school, of course, required the a proposal, the prototype, with everyone's commitment to originate from the chairs of departments. We had to build consensus there that the chairs really control the faculty and their own curriculum of their own department. So we had consensus, but the formal process went to the Undergraduate Policy Committee. And the Undergraduate Policy Committee actually has responsibility for governance of the undergraduate program. And there we do have departmental representation as well as student representation and professional staff. And from there it went to Academic Council, and from Academic Council to a vote by the whole faculty. In the 11th hour, I would say, of the vote to the faculty, about a week before, there were some concerns on behalf of faculty that resulted in a friendly amendment, and that friendly amendment was incorporated in the motion that went before the faculty. And I'm really delighted to say that the vote was unanimous on December the 9th of 11, that this new curriculum be implemented, despite concerns, you know, all of the ones we talked about and all of the sort of hiccups that occur along the way. And we could accommodate the friendly amendment without any difficulty. In fact, it's being acted on now as Compass 2 rolls out. So that was sort of the formal process, and of course from the Kelley School it goes to the campus and, you know, for final approval. And Professor Venkat, who at the time was associate dean in the school, was a member of the campus committee and made sure they knew what was coming. And so there were no concerns by other schools that this was an attempt for the business school to substantially, you know, reach out into areas that were more properly their own. So we went forward and began, you know, rolling out the program. Actually, in January of 12, because we had some transfer students and had to get going very quickly. And that one of the reasons we had to do that had to do with the Global Foundations Core, and so we'll be discussing that in another video, because that's one of the most exciting parts of the program, I think. Yeah.